Hi. I just wanted to, okay, slow down. I've been thinking about a poster's comment, this has been a couple weeks now, um, about consciousness. And so I wanted to make a specific video about consciousness. And I'm going to do a little bit of graphic here. Video editing, yay. This is the brain, an MRI scan, and how it activates. And the basic statement is there is no consciousness. The idea is that we have two activities going on in our brain. We have our sensory inputs, and we have our active thoughts going on. So stimulated thoughts. So you see in the MRI that there's active spaces in the scan. Now people, at least in the 80s, I think, is when it emerged that we're only using 15% of our brain at one given moment in time. We're only using 15% of our brain because that region of the brain is active. Because of the stimuli being put on the body is causing that region to be active. So how does this interact with consciousness? Before I get into that, there's the other video. If you haven't seen that video, it's in the link. It's in the description. The full playlist of all these videos are also in the description. Watch that to get up to speed on this or to get more detail on this. But anyway, so we have active regions in the brain. So we have an input. It's stimulating our brain, and that's causing an output. How consciousness emerges is the loop that occurs. So, and it's not just. So let's see. Supposedly men only have 3 active memories at a given time, while women can have up to 7 active memories at a time. I don't know. That's subjective information. If we could highlight a memory given the brain, the MRI scan, we could say how many memories are being active at one given time. And so an active memory is your short-term memory in my mind. There is no short-term memory as psychologists, doctors like to discuss. So short-term memory to me is the activation of the neurons in the brain, while long-term memory is your brain took it upon itself to grow new neurons and store those patterns in the brain. So short-term memory is just the activation of the neurons, the nerves, the input system, the output system, all those systems being active. So it's just an activation, while long-term memory, when you go to sleep. So my opinion is that the act of sleeping allows your brain to solidify memories. So what it probably does is it will store the active pattern, i.e. create a couple new neurons while the event is happening, and then go back and try and fit more neurons, i.e. more connective neurons. So you have the initial active neurons, which is the memory itself, and then it creates new connections between the existing memories that are there, and it tries to correlate and understand those connections and make them while you're sleeping. That's the whole point of dreams. So we have short-term memory is just the activation. Long-term memory is a combination of creating new neurons for the memory, and then creating new neurons during sleep that create connectivity of the events of the day. And then we have what is consciousness. So when we have activation, we have short-term memory. Let's just say we have 3 active concepts happening at a given moment. All the inputs that we're receiving. So let me give a specific example. So my hand is being warmed up. It's not painful, but it's definitely warming up more than it should be. And then on the other hand, I have some person trying to talk to me about something. And then I have a third thing going on, which is a police car with their sirens going, and that's going on. In my brain, I have these 3 stimulus going on, and my brain is trying to assess which one to react to, which one to pay attention to, which one's the most important. And it's doing that by doing a correlation. It's saying, well, I have past memories. These are being active. These inputs, these 3 distinct inputs are being active. They're not really overlapping in my brain pattern. My stored memories are not overlapping these concepts. So they're not related. And based on my previous experience, my previous memories, which ones are getting, which areas of the brain are being active, then it hits a memory that triggers an emotional memory, if you will. That emotional memory has a strong association with it. My hand is burning. Let's say that's the target issue, and my brain is saying, well, past experience, when my hand is warming up, but let's expand on this. This is really complicated. So my hand is warming up, but my eyes are paying attention to my surrounding. Guess where I'm standing? I'm standing in the kitchen. Why is my hand warming up? I'm standing in the kitchen. I see that I'm near the stove, so I have visual input that's being processed. My brain is being activated, so it's creating connections between my visual input, my hand being warmed up, and the fact that I'm standing next to a stove, and I have previous memory of being next to a stove, my hand warming up. That triggers the cascade effect, which I discussed in my other video of the looping of the stimulus, the input, and then the output, and then it comes back around and it says, oh, okay, so we had a memory. So I get the input, which then wraps around and then activates the memory and then wraps around, and it says that, well, associated with this memory is you getting burned. So the actual act of a blister forming on my hand, the pain associated with it, and then the cascading effect of remembering what I had to do the last time. That event, or in the brain then says, well, there was a strong emotion related to it. I'm going to activate that strong emotion. I mean, it doesn't say that it's going to activate it. It's all these inputs are activating the pathways in the brain, which eventually trigger that pathway that is associated with that strong memory. That strong memory gets an output, which stimulates the actual nerves, which then provides new input into the brain, which then the brain interprets that as an actual memory, or an actual, okay, so the brain output is stimulating the strong emotional response. So it's saying, I need to remember this thing. And how do I remember something? I activate the nerves associated with that memory to simulate or recreate the event so that then that simulation can then be fed in as new input into the brain. That new input then passes. And so if you ever wonder why people panic, this is exactly how people panic, is that you get this looping effect and it builds up. So your brain is saying, oh, your hand is warming up. I remember being burned and hurt. Oh, your hand is warming up. I remember being burned and hurt. Oh, your hand is warming up. And it stimulates more of your brain, which stimulates more of your nerves, which causes more inputs into your brain, which makes you start to panic. I mean, it might be warm enough. Let's say it's right there above, so there might be a threshold in your brain that says, oh, well, I have a memory of it being at this temperature and it not hurting me. I left it. It's not a big deal. It's just kind of warm and uncomfortable. I'm trying to pay attention to this guy because whatever he's saying is triggering events in your brain that's saying, well, this is more important than what's being triggered about the heat. And then, of course, you have the police car, which is being totally ignored because it's not close enough. And due to your previous memories, it's not triggering an emotional response that's strong enough for you to care about the police car going on. It's far enough away. All these inputs are triggering pathways in your brain that are saying it's of low importance. So the stimuli, your nerves, are not being active as much. So your nerves are literally your driving factor. So with the heat, our nerve simulation of the previous memories are getting higher, but they haven't crossed the threshold of what the guy is saying to you and the stimulating pattern that's going on there. There is no consciousness. In all of that I've described, there is no consciousness. But wait, if I sit here and I make a conscious decision to pay attention to the heat, or I make a conscious decision to pay attention to this person, or I make a conscious decision to pull my hand away from the stove, isn't that consciousness? No, it's the stimulus. It's still just the stimulus and the pattern in your brain. So let me talk about something a little different, and how the mind behaves. So I've put this concept to use in my own brain. There's a memory trick that experts like to talk about. Experts in the field of remembering stuff. I don't really know what field that would be, but whatever. And it's called the memory palace. And what you do is you associate basically tags, if you will, or categories, or key items, keywords, hashtags to memories. A panda bear or a car, and you use that to navigate your brain. So what actually is happening, so the way I've developed the pattern is that you get a trigger, a stimulus, an input that's triggering your brain pattern, but what gets output is you're stuck. And the action of you are stuck is what's output. Not that the brain is stuck, but it's outputting you're stuck. The brain is saying I'm not able to get to the memory that you're trying to reach. And what goes on over here is that I've developed a new pattern in my brain that says when you get the out of stuck, it starts randomly shooting words. So I'm trying to remember, so specifically, the end goal would be yellow Camaro in a parking lot with a store, and the guy is is Bob standing next to the car. And so I'm ultimately trying to connect Bob to car. And so what happens in my brain is I'll get an input, maybe a yellow car drives by, and I'm like, oh, there's somebody that I wanted to talk to about something, but I'm stuck. And so the space in my brain that says I'm stuck, it says, start throwing out words. Car, engine, Camaro, Mustang, truck, house, plane, and it's doing this to stimulate my brain. It's trying to find the activation pattern, if you will, that triggers the connection between the yellow Camaro and Bob. It's trying to make that connection. That's not me actually doing it. I developed this pattern because okay, so let's wind back. And every time I get stuck, my brain creates a new pattern saying this is frustrating, and it outputs that emotional state. And it creates a pattern linked between frustrated and stuck, memory stuck. And so it creates this pattern. And it's gotten to a point where it's strong enough that my brain's like, we need to try and create a new solution. And so it starts saying, well, what if I try this? So how do we try stuff? Let me get past this line of thought before I start talking about trying stuff. So it started creating a new pattern of trying stuff. And so back to what I'm saying is that I'm throwing out these random keywords, trying to trigger the memory pattern. I eventually get to that word that allows the old existing pattern to light up, like the memory scan, like the MRI. Boom. It connects that yellow car to Bob. I had a fragment of a memory. I threw in a bunch of random data until I got to the connection of to Bob. And so, was any of that conscious? Was any of that some unseen force? No, it's all describable. I just described it all. So, while it's very complex, you have all these patterns in your brain that are trying to light up and trying to create stimulus, and those patterns are outputting simulated nerve activity to create new input back into the brain. This is a lot of steps going on, and on top of that, it's happening fractions of a second because it's analog. So the pattern, or the electrical path, the electrical value is just going straight through, up into the brain, through the pattern, and then back out and stimulating the nerve, and then the nerve creates a new input, stimulates the brain some more, so me saying random words is the nerves, or the muscle nerves, to create that word. So that would be the specific path that happened. That sound, it also creates, the input of creating the word with your mouth, and the vibration of the sound are inputs. But the sound itself goes into the ear, stimulates those nerves, creates new input back into the brain, stimulates more patterns, and that regurgitates all that information, or creates new pathways in the brain, new active pathways, not new neurons. So new active pathways It activates new pathways. It activates existing pathways. Jeez. It activates existing pathways in the brain to create new connections. So the concept back to short-term active memory, we have three concepts that we can hold in our brain. So I have the yellow car concept, and then I have this amorphous idea of somebody, and then I have the system that's trying to stimulate who that somebody is. And by holding the random input generator and the yellow car in context, the paths that are active looking for Bob from the concept of somebody, the somebody moves around in my brain pattern as I create new stimuli. And it moves around, so maybe I should be using that MRI image on this, but it moves around the active pattern, the stimulated pattern, but it holds the other two in place. So all of that is a mechanical event. And going back to how do you try stuff, it's the exact same thing now that I think about it more clearly. It's the exact same thing. It's just you're now at the step of what do I do? And your brain is like, it has two active zones, but a third one that's just kind of floating around, and it stumbles upon. So maybe you poke yourself. And I don't mean you literally think to poke yourself, but you're getting all this stimuli. You're always getting stimuli. I mean, nothing is ever turned off. I guess technically, if you're in deep sleep, your body put out drugs that put you turned everything off. So that's how your body turns off. It outputs the drug to shut all your nerves off. Anyway. So you have your active stuck pattern and your active memory that you're trying to get to, and your brain is just kind of floating on the third thing, and something triggered the thought that, oh, well, if I just randomly output stuff, that'll get me to where I need to go. And so that's a built-up behavior. It's not consciousness. It's previous patterns have built up to that point. Because something I realize with people is if I ask them to go eat lunch, and they're like, well, where do you want to go? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, that stuck problem was, well, let me look. Most people learn the behavior of, well, let me go look and see what's available. Let me cross-check with you to see if you like any of these places. And then I got to a point where, and then they'll be like, well, I don't know which one you want. And then I'll just read off the list of lunch items that I'm willing to go to. And they say, okay, I like that one. And then this becomes a pattern in my brain where I'm saying, oh, well, if I just ramble off a bunch of restaurants, the person I'm asking to go to lunch to, something will click in their brain and they'll say, I want to go there. And I'm like, okay, well, let me try that with random things that I get stuck on. I got stuck on trying to associate yellow car with Bob. Let me try and just randomly throw some words at it until it works. And so I'm leveraging a past pattern that worked for another situation. That cross-correlation, though, allowed me to make that assumption that maybe, so the cross-correlation. So the memory pattern of lunch and asking people random was partially active while I'm stuck at yellow car and not knowing what to do. So I'm at yellow car, somebody, but my past experience of throwing random, rattling off a list of restaurants to somebody stimulated their ability to recall something. And so this is partially active, this memory of restaurant list / solving a memory decision error. And so while I'm sitting here thinking about trying to remember what's going on over here with yellow car and somebody, the restaurant list is partially active. And so that creates new input. That new input collection says, oh, this worked in this scenario. Let's do it over here. Does it work? And by golly, it works. Okay, this pattern of randomly trying stuff gets stronger. Your brain says, I need to store that as a memory. And it stores that pattern because it got stronger when you tried it out. So to me, it's all mechanical. It's a very functional system, but the complexity comes with the amount of memories, the amount of inputs, the amount of outputs that are going on. I mean, we got trillions upon more than the number of stars in the universe, as people like to say, going on in there. Being active, not being active, connecting, not connecting. I mean, it's crazy. And so it is complicated. And the other issue is that people in general are not able to conceptualize what's going on in their brain because they become slightly disconnected. I have Asperger's, and so I have the opposite problem. So normal people tend to focus on their emotions, and they're very responsive in understanding of their emotional state, while I literally feel like my emotions are happening on another plane, if you will. Not spiritually plane, but it's like me watching somebody have an emotional reaction to something as opposed to me directly experiencing the emotions. I don't have the fine-tuned knowledge of what's going on emotionally, but I do have the fine-tuned knowledge of what's happening logically, functionally going on in the brain. I can perceive what the brain is doing mechanically. It makes it really easy for me to do that. And so I can see how people say, well, I get an emotion and that triggers something inside my brain to make me remember something, to make me go do something. But how did that emotion initially emerge? Well, the emotion itself is a complex set of inputs and outputs that are happening. So you got some physical input or some memory that's being triggered, but you're not really consciously aware of that memory being triggered. And it's causing the emotional state to rise as it's looping through the active memory or activating more memory. And it's causing the emotional state to rise. That emotional state gets to a point where it's activating another specific memory, which says, oh, you just forgot a hair appointment or something. So from the biology, the other person was asking biology, and I don't study biology specifically. I have a cursory high-level understanding of biology. And so to say specifically that there's a biological element, I mean, I described a lot of biology in that. You have the neural pathways, you have the inputs, stimulus, sensory inputs, you have your emotional inputs, you have your memory inputs, which are just stimulating. So a memory input would be an activation in your brain that stimulates nerves in your body that create new inputs back into the brain. So all that is kind of biology, but none of it is speaking specifically to that flow of information, that path, that pattern of information through the system. And so I can't say that this specific neuron or this specific ganglia or this specific chemical composition or this specific cell or whatever is the cause of all this behavior. I don't pay attention to it because I don't think it's relevant. Being able to recreate it in a simulation, I'm looking at it from a black box perspective. I'm not looking at a reverse engineer perspective. So anyway, I hope it was informational. And if you did, I encourage you to watch the other video if you haven't watched it. If you have, also if you want, I'm looking to create another video that precursors the mind-body video that basically talks to where I acquired all of this information. So let me know if that video is important to you. If it is, I'll try and create it sooner rather than later. But anyway, thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye.